Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. Antioch resident Kyle Rittenhouse is found not guilty on all charges by a Kenosha jury in connection with the killing of 2 men and wounding of a third during unrest last summer. We'll have the very latest on this from Kenosha with Amanda Vinicky and be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment. But first, some of today's other top stories. An explosive Chicago Public Schools investigation finds at least a dozen teachers and staffers at a Northwest Side school either engaged in sexual misconduct or a cover-up. The investigation by CPS's Inspector General was announced by new CEO Pedro Martinez today. It found wrongdoing by 12 staffers and 1 volunteer at Marine Leadership Academy in Logan Square, alleging that staffers were grooming students for sexual relationships once they turned 18. And we have much more on this story on our website. New details are out today on the bids for a Chicago casino. The 5 submissions include a $1.3 billion casino proposal at McCormick Place and a $2 billion proposal at the giant slice of land known as the 78. Those are from Rush Street Gaming. And then there's a $1.6 billion proposal just south of McCormick Place and a $1.8 billion proposal at the Chicago Tribune printing press site. And those are from Bally's. And then there's a $1.7 billion proposal from Hard Rock for a complex at the proposed One Central development. A cross-section of departments will weigh in on the plans and present their final recommendation to the mayor by early next year. And the first CTA rides on the new Belmont flyover took off this morning. The project is part of the $2 billion red, brown, and purple line modernization, and today capped off 4 years of construction on the new bridge that allows brown line trains to fly over red line trains just north of Belmont. The CTA says this completes phase 1 of that massive rebuilding program. And as we mentioned at the top, Illinois teen Kyle Rittenhouse is a free man. He was fully acquitted this afternoon by a Kenosha jury. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from just outside the Kenosha County Courthouse with the very latest. Amanda.
Yes, Paris, Kyle Rittenhouse was facing life in prison for felony charges, including first-degree reckless homicide. It took a 12-person jury 3.5 days to determine that he was not guilty of all 5 felony counts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Rittenhouse got emotional as the verdict was announced, dropping to his chair. He later hugged one of his lawyers. The teen appeared to leave the courthouse, as you said, now a free man, through a back exit, so no public statements from him, no sightings of him after that verdict. But defense attorney Mark Richards says Rittenhouse is on his way home and ready to get on with his life.
He has a huge sense of relief for what the jury did to him today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened.
Richard says that in 2 mock trials leading up to this real courtroom battle, the defense fared better when Rittenhouse took the stand, which is why Rittenhouse testified last Wednesday, breaking down as he told the jury that he had done nothing wrong and he was defending himself last August when he shot and injured 1 man and shot and killed 2 others, Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber, whose partners say justice was not served and they will not rest.
The biggest thing that I need to say is that if 1 person's life or 2 persons' lives don't matter, then none of our lives matter. So it's either all of our lives matter or none of them matter. And I feel like in this case, it feels like the victims' lives don't matter. And I don't think that that's acceptable. And that's what's on my heart today.
Prosecutors offered no comment, only issuing statements. While we are disappointed with the verdict, it must be respected. We are grateful to the members of the jury for their diligent and thoughtful deliberations. The Kenosha community has endured much over the past 15 months, and yet we remain resilient and strong. Now, there was no unrest or violence here in Kenosha, though there was a crowd at the courthouse immediately after that verdict was announced. Executive Director of Kenosha Coalition Organizing Resolution, or KCOR, is a violence interrupters group created in the wake of Jacob Blake's shooting that instigated all of this unrest. He says that he believes the verdict shows there is no justice for oppressed people. He says his side, well, they may have vandalized property when they were exercising their First Amendment rights, but never resorted to violence.
On the opposite side, though, they took 2.5 lives, and they exacted violence against the people while they were worried about the property, and the life of the people were looked at as insignificant in contrast to the property.
Business about.
He also says that the judge showed bias and appeared determined that Rittenhouse would be let off free. Now, Rittenhouse also has his defenders, including Mark McCloskey, that St. Louis attorney who really became a household name when he waved a gun at Black Lives Matter protesters in St. Louis last year. McCloskey called Rittenhouse a tremendous man. He says that Rittenhouse showed great composure by only resorting to fire when he was under attack.
The mainstream media and the leftist government wants to take that right away from us. They want to punish people for standing up to the mob. There's no greater crime in this country right now than refusing to submit. And that's what the Second Amendment is all about, though. It says we have a right to defend ourselves. We have a right to stand up for ourselves. And that's what we did. That's what Kyle did. And that's what all God-fearing American citizens need to do.
So now, speaking of the media, I don't know if you can tell, but there are still some folks outside the courthouse, but they are all, as far as I can tell anyway, members of our profession, Paris, journalists. There's no sign of any violence, unrest, or demonstrations here in Kenosha. Back to you.
Amanda, we're glad for that, and thank you so much for that report. And we'll have more coverage of the trial and verdict Saturday at 6 p.m. on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And now on to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Sam Charles of WGN News, Christian Farr of NBC5 News, Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and our own Heather Sharon of WTTW News. Christian Farr, you were up there all this week watching demonstrations on the courthouse. Some of them got heated. Are you surprised at the relative calm out there after today's verdict?
You know, there's a lot of speculation of why you didn't have the same amount of people that you had last year. You know, this all happened in August. We know that weather is a factor into it, but there were still a large number of people on both sides of this issue, people who fully supported Kyle who were there, people who were totally against him, felt that he should have prison time for what happened. Fists were thrown out there just a few times, you know, but mainly people stood amazingly side by side and expressed their points as it related to all of this. Wasn't up there today, but it sounds like it was pretty much business as usual as it had been since Monday.
And I was up there a couple days this week, and local law enforcement said each day that they were confident that no unrest would break out. Clarence Page, we know that the nation was watching this case. It has inflamed partisan tensions. Your reaction to today's acquittal?
Well, I wasn't surprised. What was interesting to me about this whole story from a journalist perspective is how much our public image of Kyle Rittenhouse changed over the course of this story. When it first began, the reports were a young man believed to be a member of a far-right militia, et cetera, had come up to shoot rioters. That was the kind of impression that was given. Over time, especially once you had an actual trial, we began to see the story was more complicated than we thought at first. And a lot of folks were saying the self-defense defense really had some merit to it. However, do we want to send a message that anybody can just go out on the street with a long gun and become a vigilante, if you will? And that's what really made this so complicated emotionally and legally, frankly. A lot of people looking with great scrutiny on the judge and how he was handling this. And so in the end, I was not surprised by the verdict. I have to say, though, as one colleague said, that this was fair but not just. I felt like there was not justice here.
Certainly.
And I think that's a justice on that level when a lot was felt about it.
Such complicated circumstances here. Sam Charles, you were also up there this week. The jury took 3+ days. A lot of people started to whisper that perhaps they're hung up, perhaps a couple members are hung up on a couple of the charges. Any insight as to what might have gone on in that deliberation room?
You know, it's pretty hard to tell. Historically, those who follow trials pretty closely tend to feel that as juries take their time, as deliberations drag on longer and longer, it usually means bad news for a defendant. Typically, that is a signal that jurors are really drilling down on where and how to convict someone. However, obviously, that was not the case here in Kenosha. Jurors sent a few questions to the judge as deliberations were proceeding. And I believe on Thursday, Judge Schrader allowed one juror to bring their instructions home and the notes that were on them, to bring those home with them. So definitely some eyebrow-raising decisions from Judge Schrader over the course of the trial. However, after 3.5 days, jurors were able to deliver a verdict today.
And I want to talk about the judge a little more in a bit, but Heather Sharon, let's bring you in here. Both Mayor Lightfoot and Governor Pritzker expressed regret over today's verdict. As you know, Mayor Lightfoot canceled some police days off in anticipation of possible unrest. Any intelligence that there will be unrest materialize in Chicago?
No, the mayor said yesterday there was no indication that there was any threat to Chicago. And in fact, just before we went on the air, the mayor lit the downtown Christmas tree. At the same time, there was a relatively large but peaceful protest of the verdict over, elsewhere in downtown. So really business as usual, and Chicago's getting ready for the holidays. And of course, the open questions are whether that will continue or whether Chicago will see some big protests or even unrest, along with the crime rate that everybody's focused on right now, which I honestly think had more to do with the mayor's decision to ensure that there was enough police staff on duty.
And Christian Farr, there was a lot of discussion about race in this case, even though the alleged perpetrator here, Kyle Rittenhouse, is white. The two men shot were white and killed. The one injured was also white. What role did race play, do you think?
I think it played a very big role. The first day that I went up there when deliberations started, I went to talk to businesses. A lot of them, actually a majority of them, 99% of them, did not want to talk to the media. I think they felt like the media was the one that incited this. But I went into one business, I won't mention which one it was, but the business owner told me that he said, I asked him, do you think there'd be unrest? And he goes, there's not going to be any unrest. This is 3 white men who were shot. Nobody cares about us. And he was a white man. And I thought that was kind of shocking. I didn't really know how to respond to him at that time. But race does have a whole lot to do with this. We saw what happened when Jacob Blake was shot by the Kenosha police officer. A great deal of unrest that happened there. But there's a racial reckoning that's going on right now, especially post George Floyd. So I think race is a big issue. But, the discussion on the steps between these protesters really was self-defense. He was defending himself. There was no discussion about the fact that he came from Antioch, traveled, 20 miles up to Kenosha with an AR-15, and then this happened. That discussion wasn't going on. So I think it's going to be something that's going to be discussed for a very long time.
Right. There's a verdict. There's an acquittal here. But at the same time, as you said, Christian, he had an AR-15. He was not qualified to keep any peace or engage in any kind of law enforcement. Sam Charles, should prosecutors maybe have brought different charges against him?
I mean, that's a question that I'm sure the Kenosha County prosecutors will be asking themselves for some time to come. I'm sure there will be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking as far as their strategy went as far as the trial goes. But, those are things that are going to be weighing heavy on them for some time to come, for sure. And, obviously, Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted. He is, as far as any legal observer is concerned, he's a free man. He was found not guilty by a jury of his peers. And, the letter of the law says that he is free to go.
And Clarence Page, the way you viewed this case, almost entirely dependent on your political ideology. On the right, believing that it was self-defense. On the left, believing that, I should say on the extremes here of both sides, that this was an action of vigilantism. What does this say about the broader political and ideological divide in this country right now?
Well, it certainly is symbolic of that divide. It says we need to re-examine our laws regarding guns, regarding voluntarism, what constitutes vigilantism, what is it proper for a guy who was 17 at the time to go and take a car and a gun to the next state and be a self-appointed volunteer militiaman would be the polite word for it, speaking of the Second Amendment. But also, the race angle is intriguing to me. Yeah, all the principals in this episode were white, but the trigger of this whole sad saga was the shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake, by a police officer in controversial circumstances. And look at some of the other cases around the country. Look at a young man named Trayvon Martin in Florida, and a neighborhood security guard named Zimmerman, who goes out and confronts him. It radios in that there's a young black guy walking around who looks suspicious. That's all it took for him to take it upon himself to get into a tussle that led to Trayvon Martin's death. And again, the same kind of controversy. People are saying, well, he had a right to do that. Who was saying Trayvon was innocent? It's racial prejudice. And that happens too often around the country, where a black guy doing what the young man Rittenhouse did in Wisconsin would be treated quite differently. And that's something else people are talking about.
And you've got the Ahmaud Arbery case that's very closely watched in Georgia. Heather Sharon, among the folks that are upset with this verdict, they worry that this could perhaps embolden other folks to go out to demonstrations like this and bring guns and potentially engage in violence. Are those fair concerns?
Absolutely. And we heard that concern from Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who called Kyle Rittenhouse's conduct reckless, even if it didn't warrant a conviction, according to the jury. And I think that a lot of people are concerned that this further blurs the line about when you can have a gun, when you can carry a gun, and what kind of gun that you can have. The defense or the prosecution tried to make the point that lots of people had guns that night. Kyle Rittenhouse was the only person who shot anybody. That was not convincing, apparently, to the jury. And I think it raises questions about whether our laws are adequate to address the number of guns that are now in everybody's possession. And we're, of course, waiting a U.S. Supreme Court decision about whether there's a right to have a gun, in public. The right to have one in your home has been established. So we will have to wait and see what that decision says and how that impacts this discussion.
All right, Kristen, I want to return to the judge, Judge Bruce Schroeder. I went into the chambers this week. They're very ornate chambers at that Kenosha County Courthouse. He's kind of sitting on a throne. He was very prickly at some of the scrutiny he was receiving in public, perhaps not used to having trials and cases filmed like this and broadcast. What did you make of how he ran this case?
Well, there's been a lot of judgment about the judge, right? Especially in comparison to the Ahmaud Arbery judge, who we saw Reverend Jesse Jackson right here from Chicago go visit that courtroom. The defense not very happy with that. But then you have this judge pushing back on a lot of things during this trial, and some things that, of course, he should have pushed back on. I mean, my colleagues at MSNBC being accused of following jurors. And that didn't make us look good in the media when we were there. I think there's a lot of questions. I mean, as I go through Instagram and just look at things that are not journalist related pages, you see people taking pot shots at the judge, believing that he was really pro defense in this case, which makes you scratch your head just a little bit on how this trial unfolded. But again, he's been acquitted. The jury has spoken. He's not the one who made the ultimate decision. It was 12 people who made that decision. He's acquitted. As Sam said, he's free to go. But now he's got to face those civil lawsuits that are going to come.
And Clarence Page, a lot of lawmakers and politicians weighing in, Republican lawmakers taking the opportunity to say things like there should be some kind of congressional medal or recognition. Do you foresee Kyle Rittenhouse becoming some kind of heroic figure of the right?
Well, he's not becoming, he is one now. There's been massive fundraising, which helped his cause a lot on his behalf. One thing I've learned over the years, the pro-gun rights people, they're a minority, but they are an active minority. They raise money, they work door to door, et cetera, et cetera. A headline like this brings them out running. So folks who say we need to have more gun control, whatever, look at what you're up against. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying just remember what you're up against. It's going to be a tough fight. And that's what's happened. Somebody like Rittenhouse becomes a martyr for their cause, if you will.
And even the former president sending out a fundraising pitch based off of this verdict. Let's move on to some local news. Here's what Mayor Lightfoot said about the prospect of John Catanzaro, who, by the way, retired from his job at CPD, saying he wants to run for mayor.
It would be a gift.
In all seriousness.
In all seriousness, it would be a gift.
If he would run.
Let him run. I'd have a lot of fun with that.
Catanzaro, of course, faced being fired by the Chicago Police Board, retired. Instead, he's still head of the FOP. Sam Charles, would it really be a gift to Mayor Lightfoot if he ran?
You know, I think this is one of those situations where I think everyone should be careful what they wish for. John Catanzaro and Mayor Lori Lightfoot have been at loggerheads essentially since he was elected FOP president about a year and a half ago. The relationship between City Hall and the FOP has for years been relatively icy, with rank and file officers working without a contract for about 4 years. That was entered in this past September, and that was obviously the largest concern for many, many officers. However, with Catanzaro now floating the idea of running for mayor, you know, he and the mayor clearly do not like each other, and that's plain to see to anybody who bothers to look.
And Sam, you were at the police board hearing where he was facing termination. What was that like?
It was interesting to say the least. You know, I've covered quite a few police board hearings, and it was apparent based on, you know, Catanzaro's demeanor that to a point he was actually enjoying it. He was pushing back forcefully on a lot of the questions that were posed to him by city attorneys. And truth be told, it seemed as though his resignation, or the announcement that he would resign, that appeared to be part of the plan since before the hearing even started. It was not terribly surprising when he made that announcement, but it's also important to point out that even if he was fired, even if the board opted to sever him from the department, that would not have precluded him from remaining president of the union, as the bylaws of the union are currently written.
Certainly seems to relish these fights and the media attention that comes along with it. Heather Sharon, we've got less than 2 weeks now until Chicago aldermen have to have a new ward map. What's that ward map going to look like?
It is anyone's guess at this point, and the clock is ticking. The fundamental question is, will the Black Caucus blink and accept a map with fewer than 18 wards with a majority of Black voters, or will the Latino Caucus agree to accept a map with fewer than 15 wards with a majority of Latino voters? Neither side is budging right now, and it is not possible, as far as anybody can see, to draw a map that gives them both what they want, which means that we are in the middle of a zero-sum game that will determine the shape of Chicago politics for at least the next decade. And it's very fraught because we live in a city where the Black population has dropped about 10% over the past decade, and the Latino population has risen about 5%. And Latinos at City Hall are determined to get that share of political power they say they're deserved, while Black politicians want to hang on to what they have. And there is no easy solution, and I expect this is going to go right down to the wire on December 1st. And if there's no agreement, it will be up to the voters of Chicago to pick between officially submitted maps, and that means it will be a free-for-all.
And we'll have our viewers go look up the rules here. They're very complicated, but as you said, Heather, if there are not enough votes on City Council for an agreed-upon map, it will go to public referendum and the voters will weigh in. Clarence Page, since we have you from Washington, the big news out of Washington was the passage of President Biden's $2 trillion social spending bill. The question now, as it has always been, is what do Senators Manchin and Sinema want to do with it?
What do Senators Manchin and Sinema want to do with anything? I mean, they just love being the mystery couple. But you read the situation correctly. We're in for a replay of the kind of politics that occurred in the House. But the Senate is, of course, this more stately body. It tends to be more stability-oriented and a bit more conservative, which doesn't bode well for Biden's plan. But they're senators. They want to bring home the bacon to their states, whether they admit it or not. So I suspect they are going to settle on something. But we're going to see some more trims, looks like, in the budget that Biden has proposed. And that is going to get trimmed back some more, now quite possibly. At the same time, I don't want to sound too cocky because here in Washington these days, predictions often fail. But I would just say, stay tuned.
So instead of Build Back Better, maybe they should call it Trim Back Better as the Senate considers this bill. All right, well, we're out of time, so our thanks to Sam Charles, Christian Farr, Clarence Page, and Heather Sharon. And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, and then immediately after that, Chicago Tonight Black Voices at 6:30 with more coverage of the Rittenhouse verdict. And we're back at 7 o'clock all next week. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford.